Okay, so today we're going to be talking about two really cool Iron Age empires, the Maurya and the Gupta of India. And we still are in the classical period, so we're still talking about the same time as the Romans and the Hans. So while we're talking about these empires, I want you to think about what are the common attributes of empires. You know, there's only so many ways to skin a cat, and there's only so many ways to run an empire. For example, the Maurya and the Persian Empire both have this really complex, widespread infrastructure. You know, they have good use of roads, bureaucracies, they use their governors to run their provinces, they have a stable tax base, and a common currency. So, like I said, make sure that you have your guided notes and that you're following along as we go through this today. So what we're going to talk about with India is its social hierarchy because it's very unique to this region of South Asia. Um, Forming this ideology kind of helps justify the social hierarchy and the inequalities that really exist here. So we're just going to review the Varna, the caste system, which is really based on the ideals of Hinduism. They justify, like I said, the social inequality through religious justification. They use this religious backing to enforce these really drastic inequalities. So at the top of your social class are the Brahmins. These are going to be your priests. They are the ones conducting rituals to maintain order of the universe. And below the Brahmins, you have the Kshatriyas. This is going to be your warrior class. You have a lot of kings and queens, kings especially, not queens, that come out of this caste system, and it makes sense because as these states are warring against one another, you know, the ones that are winning come out and they become the kings. Below the Kshatriyas, you have the Vaishyas. These are going to be your artisans, the people that make things. This is a very skilled craft. These are not, you know, this is not a lowly class. It would be the Vaishyas that would actually make this column, this very elaborate column that you see here. Below the Vaishyas, you have the Shudras, who are basically your peasant farmers. And then you have those with no caste called the untouchables. They're going to be just the lowest of the classes. So all of these are really, there's a direct chain to Hinduism here because by focusing on those specific dharma or your duties of the caste, you'll be able to reincarnate and move up. And the ultimate goal is to ultimately be reincarnated as the Brahmins, who are basically on the same level as a god in Hinduism. So the idea is if you complete your duties, you get good karma. Your karma is going to raise or lower your position. And that has to do with your jati. And the jati is a job within your caste. It's going to be your mechanism for moving positions or moving your social classes. Okay. Confucianism, as we talk about this, think about Confucianism versus Hinduism. Both of these are very highly structured ideologies. The difference is with Confucianism, they have this idea that, you know, anybody from the peasant classes could, in theory, join the Imperial Academy if they win the spot based on merit or they find someone that will sponsor them in the academy. So in the comparison of Hinduism versus Confucianism, Confucianism does allow for some movement, and it's not quite as static as others. So this caste system, like I said, is justified by religion. There's a story in the Rig Veda, which is basically the basis of Hinduism, that explains their caste system. And that is that the caste systems came out of the god Purusha. Um, they kind of sprang out of Purusha's mouth, the Brahmins out of the mouth, and then the arms with the Kshatriyas, the legs with the Vaishyas, and the feet with the Shudras. So with these caste systems, what's common in all of our empires is that there's always a religion to explain these inequalities. You know, you have to have some system that will justify the position of the elite versus, you know, the disenfranchised or the lower classes. And they really use religion across all of our empires to kind of get this across. Okay, so the Maurya and the Gupta are the two empires that come around in the classical period or Iron Age because they're using iron weapons to coerce others and build their empires. And you can see here what's in the green is the beginning of the Mauryan Empire under Chandra Gupta, and it expands under Ashoka, who we'll get to in a little bit. And it's kind of hard to visualize just how large this empire is, but if you were to take India and put it over the continental United States, it's roughly the same size, so it's very impressive that they would have such a cohesive empire. And Pataliputra is basically the heart, the capital of our empire. So the Mauryan Empire is going to take up almost all of India. It's going to go over to Bangladesh over here, Nepal, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, so a lot of South and Central Asia. Okay, so Chandragupta is the one that's really credited with uniting the Mauryan Empire. He is a conqueror, like most of our emperors. He comes out of these warring states and is able to unite them. He unifies northern India, and his system is extremely centralized. It's similar to the first Jin dynasty empire, in that the first Chen was the one that brought China out of the warring states, and that's pretty much what Chandragupta does. So he creates this extremely complex, highly centralized bureaucracy. The empire is divided into provinces. You have districts for tax assessments and law enforcement. But Chandragupta was pretty paranoid. He feared assassination. He was always worried about someone killing him, which kind of makes sense if you're living in this age of all these warring nations. So he would use food tasters. He slept in different rooms. And it's kind of interesting, especially the way that Chandragupta ends. In 301, he gives up his throne and becomes a Jain. I really want to highlight this idea of Jainism. Put a big star around it. It's mostly found in South Asia, and its focus is nonviolence. Oops. So what's funny is that Chandragupta gets really, really big into Jainism, and his focus is nonviolence. He wants to they're so nonviolent that they're actually strict vegetarians. And one of the focuses here is to rid yourself of these worldly desires. Well, one of those worldly desires includes food. So Chandragupta denies himself food so much that he actually ends up starving to death. Okay. Kautilya is Chandragupta's advisor, and he writes a book that's very similar to a book written by Machiavelli during the Renaissance called the Prince. We'll get to that here in a few weeks, but basically the Arthashastra is a guide for the king and his ministers. Um, he says that the state should be very strong, that your laws need to be strict. It really just supports an absolute ruler. It says supports royal power. The great evil in society is anarchy or the absence of a government. So a single ruler is needed to use force when necessary. And it is a rational philosophy to think of when you have an empire that's been united out of all these warring states. So for these people that experience such chaos, this seems like a very rational ideology to have. Okay, one of the biggest names we're going to talk about, and the greatest of the leaders of the Maurya Empire, is Ashoka. He is a common topic on the AP exam, and if you get any essay questions about the classical period, including the Maurya Empire, he's a really great piece of evidence to add to this. Okay, Ashoka is important because of his religious conversion. He witnesses all this extreme death and destruction at the Battle of Kalinga. And he is just appalled at everything that's happening. So he actually converts to Buddhism. He is religiously tolerant, and he patronizes Buddhist art, architecture, and culture. And I want you to add to this fourth bullet that he actually patronizes Buddhist monasteries, where the monks would be, and they'd actually study Buddhism, study the works of the Buddha. Go back to the third bullet with the religiously tolerant, and I want you to underline that. This is important because India is one of the more culturally diverse empires that we've talked about so far. Its diversity and its size make it really important to retain this religious tolerance. It's kind of easy to do because Hinduism incorporates new ideas. So they have so many gods, and with the diversity and the size of the empire, it's just not worthwhile to be religiously intolerant. So, what Ashoka does is he puts these pillars up all over the empire, declaring the peaceful intent. They would justify his rule through the ideas of the Buddhist. And under Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire becomes a Buddhist empire. It mixes pretty well with the reality from India, like the caste system. But Buddhism actually arises, or it comes out of a criticism of the Hindu caste system. Because the Buddha says that anyone's soul can achieve enlightenment or nirvana at any time. You don't have to follow the Dharma to be reincarnated. The Buddha says you can do it at any point. So under Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire expands to its greatest height. All these circles here, these are where Ashoka has put those stone pillars throughout India. The triangles are the rock edicts. And like I said, the pillars are going to have this Buddhist precept. They're going to justify his rule through the ideas of Buddhism. Okay, so Ashoka's law code, or these pillars, are really a series of laws regarding the universe, empire, morality. Most of them are written in Sanskrit, which is the traditional language, but one was written in Greek and one was written in Aramaic, which is a language found near the Roman Empire. It's actually the language that Jesus of Nazareth spoke. And what's important to note about these pillars and their different languages is that it really shows how cosmopolitan or diverse these areas were. And I want you to put a star by cosmopolitan because that's the word that we'll use to in place of diverse. Because as these empires expand, your cities grow and you have different cultures coming in there. And the variety of these cultures have your cities becoming more cosmopolitan or diverse. And like we said, his laws are going to be dominated by these Buddhist ideas. And our focus here is really on nonviolence, morality, and religious toleration. The pillar on the left is actually an example of one of Ashoka's pillars that has his law code written on it. So Ashoka is really the high point of the Mauryan Empire. Things kind of fall apart after his death, and the Mauryan Empire gets broken up into many kingdoms, really until about 320 Common Era. And the Gupta Empire comes around. This picture is not the Gupta at its height. It begins in northeast India, like the Maurya Empire. It uses central power, coercion, to conquer its neighbors. And the Gupta Empire is going to come about late in the classical period, around 320. At this time, Rome is collapsing, and the Han has been gone for over 100 years. Okay. Gupta Empire really builds its foundation on its exports. It's trading pepper, like the kind you probably have at home in your kitchen, which is originally only grown in the south of India. So I'll go back really quick. Pepper is originally grown only in this area. It's the only place you could get it for the longest time. And through their trade, the Guptas are able to influence all these other cultures. If you look here, you can see that they're surrounded by oceans. So what their traders would do is they'd get in boats and they'd ride the monsoon winds to their neighbors. And through this, we have a spread of cultural influence from India into its neighbors. And the oceans here, it's something that's unique to the Gupta and Mauryan empires because it's not something that we saw with China or Persia, the sea routes. Okay, we have a big change in religion here. Basically, the Guptas were Hindu, but they were religiously tolerant because Hinduism really is so open to incorporating other gods as different incarnations of the Brahman that Buddhism essentially merges into Hinduism. They adopt the Buddha as it's just incorporated into one of their gods. And through the trade with the Guptas, the Buddhism actually finds its home in China. The Gupta Empire is not quite as centralized as the Mauryan, but it's still very highly effective. They establish a huge cultural dominance. They have a fantastic golden age. They're well known for several very important achievements. So we have a visitor, Xuanzang, who visits Gupta from China. He's a Chinese Buddhist monk who travels along the Silk Roads and visits India in the 5th century. And what he's doing here is he's retracing the path of the Buddha. He wants to try and achieve the enlightenment that the Buddha had. And when he gets to the Gupta India, he reports the people to be very happy, relatively free of government oppression, and inclined towards courtesy and charity. Other references in the journal, however, indicate that the caste system was rapidly assuming its basic features, including untouchability, the social isolation of a lowest class that is doomed to menial labor. And it's important to understand that this caste system in India, it's something that endures for thousands of years. India actually, even as recently as 5 years ago, had issues with caste systems, the untouchables not being able to use the same roads and the same water as the other caste systems. So it's a very, very strong part of the Indian culture, and it is something that lasts for a very, very long time. Okay, so Chandragupta expands the empire further into northern India, and international trade becomes a really big thing through this empire. You can see what's left of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire over here, which we'll get to that in a few weeks. The Sassanid Empire here, which we're not really going to cover. And then we have the Gupta Empire. So we have a very, very extensive trade network here. You have pepper coming out of India. The peppers, like I said, that you're used to, black and white pepper, that would be on your kitchen tables. But you have spices coming into India from Southeast Asia. So from Indonesia and other areas of Southeast Asia, you have spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, that are actually coming into India. Okay, you also have cotton goods that's going out of India. This is the only place you can get cotton at this time, and you have cotton going into China. Here it is going into Africa. And you have silk coming into India. China at the time has a monopoly on silk. They're the only ones that know how to produce it, and you can only get silk from China. Okay, so the Gupta art is a really, really big deal. What you have here is the Borobudur, which is a Buddhist temple in Indonesia. Well, it's either Hindu or Buddhist, but this feature right here indicates that it would be a Buddhist temple. And Indonesia is right here, and if I'm not mistaken, then the temple would be on this island. So you can see this is an example of the Gupta art based on Hindu that's traveling out. The Hindu art is very, very different from the Greek or Hellenistic. The Greek art was very simplistic. You had this, it was all about symmetry. You know, you'd have an open air temple that was basically a lot of columns, and you'd put a triangle on top, and it really focused on just the simplicity of the form. The Hindu art is very different. You can see here that it's much more focused. It's heavily decorated. If you were to get closer to it, there would be so many details going on that your eyes wouldn't really know where to focus. So it's a big change of pace from what we had from the Hellenistic era. But the Gupta do have a huge influence on Southeast Asian art and architecture, as you can see. Okay, so the Guptas are known for some really awesome things, innovations that we've used for thousands of years. They have huge advances in medicine. You can see they've got healing plants identified, they perform C-sections, but the inoculations are really important. They would inoculate for things like smallpox, which is something that the Europeans didn't do until the 1700s. They have In the fields of astronomy, they have the solar calendar. They figured out that it's a 365-day calendar. They know the Earth is round. Not only do they know the Earth is round, but they figured out the circumference of the Earth. And they also know that the Earth revolves around the sun. They have the heliocentric theory 1,000 years before Europe does. And these are all ideas that are really going to turn Europe on its head. You know, when we get to the scientific revolution, people are put in prison for these ideas that the Gupta had figured out, like I said, 1,000 years earlier. And the Guptas are also well known for their math systems. Their greatest achievements are in the field of mathematics. They are the first to come up with the notation of zero, or the concept of zero. They give us the notation of numbers that we use today. You may know them as Arabic numbers, but that is a little bit of a misnomer because the Islamic Empire was between Europe and India. So the Europeans first came in contact with zero and these numbers through the Islamic Empire, but really the Islamic Empire was building on Gupta's achievements. The Gupta also come up with a decimal system. You can see they have pi, the notion of pi. Like I said, the Gupta's greatest achievements were in the field of mathematics. Okay, so like all empires, they can't last forever. The Guptas were invaded by the White Huns in the 500s, which ends the Gupta Golden Age. Similar to Rome, it stays separate for much of its history. It breaks into several different Hindu kingdoms, just like Rome did. And I want you to put a star by the Rajputs. These are your Hindu prince. So if you see Rajput, you know that it's a Hindu prince. Similar to Rome, India's diversity, both politically and culturally, keeps it separated from much of its history. It's very, very rare for India to come together as a unified whole like it did under the Maurya and the Gupta Empire. So Indian history is typically characterized as this debate of unity versus disunity. They have unprecedented cultural diversity that none of our empires ever really faced. So that becomes a big issue for India for the next several hundred years. Okay, so that is going to conclude our discussion on our Iron Age Indian empires. Bring your notes and any questions with you to class when we meet again on Monday, and enjoy your weekend.